Good morning. I'm Mike Cody, editor of New Hampshire Business Review and New Hampshire Magazine. Welcome to Identifying Mental Health Needs in the Workplace, a webinar sponsored by Sheehan Phinney, one of our longtime partners. And the panel today features Madeline Hutchings, who's an attorney and psychotherapist for Sheehan Phinney, Cheryll Andrews, executive director of the Dismas Home of New Hampshire, and Jennifer Landon, who was a certified grief educator and coach with YGM Training and Consulting. And this webinar, you heard the little voice come on. It's being recorded. We'll also have a story coming out within a week or so in the Hampshire Business Review based on this webinar. And now I want to turn it over to Madeline.
All right, thank you, Mike. Good morning, everyone. So as Mike mentioned, I'm Madeline Hutchings, and I'm an attorney at Sheehan Phinney, Bass and Green here in Manchester, where my practice focuses on mental health law and nonprofit law. In connection with my mental health law practice, I'm also, as Mike mentioned, a psychotherapist. After I started practicing law, I got my master's and pursued licensure, and I maintain a part-time practice in mental health. And I followed this path initially because I knew that having a practice-informed understanding of the mental health world would enable me better to serve my legal clients, but also because I love working with my counseling clients. So thank you all for being here, where we're going to talk about mental health in the workplace. And I'm going to start by something we can call proactive accommodation. So I went to law school in Virginia, and at orientation, this woman walked up to the lecture hall podium wearing a sweater, not a suit jacket, so we were all immediately suspicious of her. And she said our school had hired her because it really did care about students' quality of life, and we could all get that thing if we listened to her advice on this hot off the presses concept called mindfulness. And so the mindfulness lady had lost me and maybe most of the room right there. And the fact that I cared about psychology already made me feel like I had a little bit of a target on my back compared to my peers, who I imagined had no emotions or other vulnerabilities. And I didn't want to be seen as a student who needed some type of psychological booster seat just to do my job. So we think that now that we're in 2026, mental health stigma is something that a certain type of, quote, emotionless person still carries around. Our silent generation neighbor who thinks that the TV show MASH is progressive, right? But the most mental health conscious person can be the most afraid to advocate for their own well-being, assuming the world doesn't care until their problems are so severe that they literally can't work anymore. So this mindset creates an unlucky loop where people in the workforce suffer in silence until they hit their breaking point. And so many of you are going to be at this webinar because requests for ADA accommodation and FMLA leave are part of your day-to-day. And you know that more and more of those requests are rooted in mental health issues. Today's recent grads are highly aware of their performance and their mood. Think what you want about Gen Z, but the fact is that we have a generation entering the workforce, and in their backpacks, they carry the anxiety of lockdown, dramatically reduced opportunities to gain comfort with in-person social skills, and a public dialogue where people are stressing over how unprepared they are. And then there's just a greater recognition across the workforce that if you're suffering at work, maybe you're not just adulting, maybe there's something wrong. So when lawyers talk about mental health, the first thing that we often do is split it into two categories. Wellness is a workplace with good lighting and pizza parties and ergonomic chairs, right? And what more could a healthy person want? Then there are mental health impairments or illnesses covered under the Americans with Disabilities Act or the Family and Medical Leave Act. And then after that division of concepts, that usually leads into a discussion of what to do when someone has requested an accommodation or leave or filed a complaint against you, the employer, under one of those laws. And today is really not about navigating compliance issues once you have an ADA or FMLA request or complaint. It's more about creating a workplace where accommodating mental health issues is something that happens naturally on your own terms before you're in ADA or FMLA territory, before your employee gets to the point where they have to say, gosh, I guess my illness does make me unable to do my job, so I better get ready to fight for my rights. And this is proactive accommodation. Mental health isn't simple, but there are some important points of knowledge that I want you to walk away with, even if you're not a mental health expert, so you have a roadmap for signs of troubled waters, how to ask about what an employee needs, and what to do in response. Since you're here, you know that good mental health prevents things like absenteeism, reduced productivity, employee turnover, lack of engagement, and reduced quality of work. But when a mental health issue rises to the level of ADA or FMLA, the stakes are raised in a different way, practically speaking. And because I'm the lawyer, I do present these pointers mindfully, considering the kind of presenting issues that are most likely to approach legally protected disabilities or illness. And so as a quick overview of how easy it is to find yourself in ADA or FMLA territory, under the ADA, a person with a disability has a physical or mental impairment substantially limiting a major life activity, has a history or record of that impairment, or is perceived as having that impairment. And so major life activities can include cognitive functions like thinking and concentrating, as well as tasks like learning and communicating. There's no simple subset of conditions that fit into the category of a disability. And a mental health condition doesn't need to involve inpatient care to qualify as a serious health condition under the FMLA either. It can involve a much less rigorous level of continuing treatment, even if someone only needs treatment twice a year. An employer may be able to require medical certification, but a diagnosis is not required for FMLA protection. So, how do you intervene before a struggling employee finds themselves unable to do their job and feels that their only option is to advocate for their rights under the law? This takes us to our first step: know the signs of troubled waters. Some are obvious, particularly when someone engages in what I think some folks can call performative suffering or sad fishing. It's something that I think that managers struggle with at work, because it's difficult to know how to deal with it. And I understand that hearing an employee talk about how they're popping PRN benzos at their desk, it's inappropriate and frustrating. But I'd also be very cautious about dismissing these behaviors as, theatrical, because they can easily tie to a legitimate underlying conditions. But many signs are a lot harder to catch than this. So the Job Accommodation Network receives the most accommodation questions on certain types of disorders. And so these are the things that are kind of being channeled toward those FMLA or ADA issues. And those are disorders like bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorder, major depression, panic disorder, PTSD, schizophrenia, and seasonal affective disorder. So let's look at depression first, because it's actually a defining characteristic of several of the disorders I just mentioned: major depressive disorder, but also bipolar, which tend to involve periods of intense depression, and seasonal affective disorder, which is depression with a seasonal pattern. So depression occasionally presents as simply our most beloved stuffed animal with depression, Eeyore from Winnie the Pooh. That's what we tend to grow up thinking of depression as, but that's not usually how we see it. It frequently presents as fatigue or sleep disturbance, aches or pains, often including digestive problems. And I don't mean pretend pains when work feels overwhelming. I mean very real pain. Distraction, restlessness, inability to attend to important responsibilities, and pessimism. And it very, very frequently presents as just outright irritability. That's what we'd call a, quote, secondary emotion for the underlying sadness or hopelessness, which we'd call the primary emotion that somebody's dealing with in depression. It's so easy to look at someone with a short fuse, or someone who makes snide remarks or who has outbursts over small things, and go, listen to him. He's not depressed. He's just not a team player. He just doesn't realize this is tough for all of us. He's moody. He doesn't care how much his attitude is impacting the group. When I hear those things, as frustrating as they are for a workplace, the first thing I think is depression. A treacherous characteristic of depression is how it can alienate the depressed person from others. If I became depressed, I'd be angry too. It's something also to think about, though, when you go to offer help, which we'll talk about in a minute. The reaction might be defensive, dismissive, or angry. But this reaction doesn't mean that the employee needs your help any less. So how about PTSD? TV PTSD usually, I find, involves some type of intense flashback state where the military vet grabs someone around the neck, imagining he's in a war zone where apparently strangulation is the preferred form of combat. That's not a symptom we'll see at the office. Instead, think fatigue, trouble concentrating, distractibility, edginess, irritability, or anger. PTSD makes itself known in many aspects of life, not just in flashbacks or nightmares. It's not an easy disorder to compartmentalize. So I also want to touch on panic disorder, and this is a good time for a brief aside about terminology, I think. So if someone says to me, Thanksgiving dinner gave me so much PTSD, I take that to mean that the dinner reminded them of difficult times. And if they say, I'm such an OCD person, they may mean they're type A. If they tell me their ex is a narcissist, I may assume they'd like me to help them blame their ex for the breakup. So, okay, I try not to be the language police, but as an employer, be mindful of how mental health terminology has been diluted with use, remembering that a diagnosis is not just talk. It means a licensed professional has determined a patient demonstrates a laundry list of items in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the DSM. Their condition is probably interfering with their lives in a highly distressing, pervasive, and in many cases, shameful way. I've had several clients, often male and late middle-aged, whose parents told them that mental health care means going to church, and they have only made it into my office looking for a diagnosis because they're desperate enough that they're willing to ask this stranger, am I crazy? They're not crazy, FYI, but they are burdened with legitimate health concerns. So, how does this connect to panic disorder? We've all used the word panic about our own feelings before. And you've probably heard someone say, oh, I'm having a panic attack, meaning I'm upset or I'm having an anxiety attack. Anxiety attacks can be highly distressing, involving intense periods of dread or overwhelming anxiety. Panic attacks, which are a required element of panic disorder, are a very different thing by clinical definition. Because of the abrupt, intense, often totally incapacitating and physiological nature of a panic attack, people who experience a panic attack very frequently are confident that they are experiencing a heart attack. Panic attacks involve 4 or more specified symptoms such as palpitations, senses of smothering or choking, chest pain, or abdominal distress. If my employee with a panic disorder tells me that they're entering a panic attack, for me to recommend that they breathe through it at their desk would be roughly equivalent to me asking someone who's projectile vomiting that they please stay in the conference room and not be a distraction from the staff meeting. A panic attack is an overwhelming physiological event. So now for a sign of troubled waters that you might not find specifically described in the DSM, but one that's prevalent with many disorders, and I definitely want to touch on, is difficulty with coworker relationships. This can be due to difficulty self-advocating, social anxiety, experiences of harassment, fear of attracting attention to the disorder or being censured, or difficulty picking up on social cues and navigating office politics. I had a young client who had just addressed his social anxiety sufficiently to enter his first job in food service, and he quickly turned into his boss's favorite employee. He was a hard worker and really desperate to succeed. Coworkers really liked him, but they stopped cleaning the bathroom and also started handing my client every difficult patron. Intensely avoidant of social conflict, my client took every bathroom cleaning shift and served every difficult customer. The boss never stopped to wonder why my client was exhibiting a Christ-like level of patience in an abusive situation, or to think, do I need to take some responsibility for how my employees' behaviors are creating a difficult situation for my best worker? My client left, luckily for greener pastures. Employees with psychiatric disabilities are more likely to experience workplace harassment. Boundaries can be more difficult to set if you're worried about confrontation or being singled out. If you're seeing an employee overextending themselves, therefore bearing mistreatment without complaint or avoiding coworkers, they're probably not just an introverted glutton for punishment. So know your workforce and don't let a fixable social environment issue be the thing that convinces an employee they don't have the mental chops to hack it in the workforce. So while I'm telling you some of the telltale signs of an underlying mental health challenge, and I hope that you feel equipped to start identifying some of these less obvious signs, I am also saying do not diagnose your employees. Employers aren't clinicians, and diagnosis talk can lead to a presumption that someone has a disability under the ADA or a harassment claim against you. It's not about diagnosing. It's about knowing, based on the signs of troubled waters, when you might need to intervene and help problem solve proactively. And what does that look like? So this takes us to step 2, know how to ask about what the employee needs. And this involves a direct conversation. So you may want to ask whether someone feels supported before any actual performance concerns arise, though in many cases, the employee's challenges will be exhibited negatively in their behaviors. In that conversation, make expectations clear, but focus on how you can support the employee with environmental changes or other resources. No one wants to be identified as the problem in the room, so do not identify the mental health challenge. Identify the environmental stressor. So, hey Daniel, thanks for taking the time for a conversation. Sometimes I like to check in with folks because this is a high pressure job, or because burnout is real, or because working with a team of diverse personalities can be difficult, or because our offices are a bustling place and I want everyone to feel empowered to succeed in their own work style, or because you recently finished your training. And I always like to make sure we've made folks feel prepared. So frame the conversation and then take a step back. This is your fact-finding mission. It requires careful listening, encouragement, assurance of privacy, and the question, so what can we do to support you? If you're not a member of HR engaging in a necessary element of ADA or FMLA processes, do not ask questions to learn about a diagnosis or treatment. If your employee does share, set boundaries. I appreciate your openness, but I do want to make sure you know that health is personal and you don't need to tell me anything you're not comfortable with. So now that you know what to look for and how to ask for what an employee needs, step 3, what do you do in response? Now, your employee may know exactly how you should respond. Okay, well, Amanda uses my desk on my remote days and I have such a hard time with her clutter. I'd be better able to focus when I'm in the office if we both kept our things in our desk organizers. I think that would make me call out less, honestly. So your employee may know how to respond, but they may not know how to solve their problem. And it's helpful to have potential resources at the ready. You can make general referrals to your employer programs, benefits, and resources. So have an inventory of mental health resources, family, caregiver, and bereavement resources. But this conversation is also an opportunity to address the direct environmental conditions affecting the employee. How does this work? Okay, so even if you just know your employee has ADHD, you don't refer them for meds or tell them which foods reduced your son's hyperactivity or go through a mindfulness exercise. Your focus is not on the disorder or even on the symptom, such as hyperactivity or inattention, right? Look at the direct environmental condition that's making those symptoms difficult in your workplace. That's your space, and it's what you have control over and really the kind of things you could and should be making recommendations over. A distracting work area, poor lighting, inflexible scheduling, an unstructured format for assignments, lack of memory or scheduling aids in the company's suite of computer services, etc. That's for that scenario, right? So distracting work areas can be modified with space enclosures, sound absorption panels, or uninterrupted work time. And this is not the SATs. If your employees work better with white noise or music, let them wear those headphones. Natural or full spectrum lighting can benefit everyone in the office. With ADHD and concentration difficulties in general, there's this technique that we call chunking, where you divide tasks into chunks of manageable sizes. It's something that we teach to a lot of our clients with attentional difficulties, and it's extremely effective for many folks. So chunking can best be accommodated with things like flexible scheduling, a modified break schedule, and dividing larger assignments into smaller tasks and goals from the get-go. A flexible work environment is also a valuable thing for things like stress management, sleep disorders, and emotion management challenges. And then also for issues with emotions, stress, or panic attacks, you can permit telephone calls to doctors or other supports. Panic attacks may involve environmental triggers that could be removed, and the employee should know that in the event of a panic attack, they can remove to a place where they have privacy and feel comfortable to engage in coping plans. And so I hope that's clear based on what I'm describing. None of these aids are groundbreaking. None of them are going to break the bank or make you change how you work. And it's much easier to provide them upfront than to wait until you have to provide them through an interactive process with an ADA complaint or an ADA accommodation request. So there are a great list of resources out there which you can employ as a proactive accommodation, especially through websites like the Job Accommodation Network. And I'm happy to connect you with those resources. There is some material that's going out with some links to a few different resources about what I'm talking about. And one page from the Job Accommodation Network has a great navigation panel where you can look at the symptom or the work kind of the work needs, and you can kind of search for different accommodations based on technical accommodations or emotions based. It's a really valuable thing that you should check out. But here's one last pointer that may not be on those lists, and I want you to remember it when you log out at the end of this hour. Tailored new employee training. This topic makes me want to put on one of those wearable sandwich boards and shout it in the street. I've worked with extremely capable and motivated clients in my mental health practice, and they have failed in their jobs for the sole reason that the training was incompatible with their learning styles or mental makeup. We often train from a one size fits all or even a sink or swim model. I mean, we know that a lot of times we really needed the new guy up to speed yesterday. But as a result, many employees don't have time to pick up the fundamental skills they need to succeed. And this can come into play with so many different disorders: autism, specific learning disability, also mood-based disorders, generalized anxiety, social anxiety, trauma or other adjustment-based disorders, depression. The list goes on. And so you probably didn't hire this employee because they're just so good at being trained quickly. That's a non-essential skill of the job. Don't lose what could have been your most dedicated person because a mental health challenge made their training experience insufficient. So, to wrap up, you already know that your goals align with your employees' goals because performance and productivity are byproducts of good mental health and employee well-being. So, let's not wait until people are fighting for their rights. Let's be proactive. It can be about creating an environment where an employee can go, I guess my challenges don't stand between me and sustainable success after all. I have something to give. It's kind of I like to think of it as the 2020s employer version of the work smarter, not harder. Tired of contacting legal to make sure you're correctly engaged in the ADA's interactive process? Do yourself a favor and accommodate in advance on your own terms. There are many proactive accommodations that can be cost-effective and efficient, that improve performance, and that let your workforce know they've found a community where they're truly seen and deeply valued. All right, so now I'm excited to turn things over to my co-presenters, the next of which will be Cheryll Andrews.
Thank you, Madeline. Um, Thank you so much for setting the stage for the next piece coming from me, right? I'm the executive director, Cheryll Andrews, at Dismas Home of New Hampshire, and I'll give you a very short overview of who we are and what we do, and how this is such an important topic in our workplace and how we sort of manage it ourselves. Dismas Home of New Hampshire provides safe and supportive residential treatment for justice-involved women, including veterans, who are facing substance use disorder and trauma-induced co-occurring mental health challenges. The goal at our facility is to help them facilitate their recovery and successful reintegration into the community. Dismas Home staff are asked to view the work environment as the resident's home, meaning we're here to do our work in the most professional and respectful way. While we're clinical and this is a program, it's home for up to a year for women who have not really had one of their own for some time. So we're walking a really fine line when we're walking into their space. It's our workspace, but it's their home. Given that residents at Dismas Home are undergoing treatment in our program, it's essential for all staff to be mindful of their own mental well-being. Various factors contribute to workplace mental health issues, including complex shift work, and compassion fatigue, because we're really working right in the thick of it with them as they travel this journey to recovery and reentry into the community. We emphasize a leave your personal life at the door policy, and we know it's not easy one to always recognize. And so, while some of the ideas I want to share with you today seem simple or obvious, my experience with staff and leadership has shown that addressing these obvious aspects foster workplace consistency and actionable items, ultimately influencing overall attitude and state of mind. And I'll just sort of say this, that while Madeline's comments were really driven about identifiable and diagnosed issues and symptoms, we all carry stuff with us from everywhere we're going, right? It could be, family stuff that's happening at home. It could be just the everyday stress of what's happening that caused the overwhelm or the anxiety about what's happening. And we at Dismas Home, we really need to leave those things behind so that we can offer a clear path to our residents who are also in mental health challenges and working through them to become, whole and healthy as citizens in the community. So some of the things that I want to share with you have to do with, again, really kind of basic, but they happen on a daily basis, and some of the framework that we've put in place. Dismas Home policies and procedures really are designed to assist employees in mental health management, their own and their clients, right? So we have a code of ethics, a patient bill of rights, confidentiality policies, conflict of interest policies, dress code, employee grievances, leave of absence, meals and breaks, professional staff boundaries, timesheets and payroll and PTO. And you think, what does all of that got to do with mental health, right? The truth is that by giving our staff these boundaries or the opportunity to have consistency and messaging and places where they can look for relief if they're a little bit stressed, gives them guidelines that they can lean on heavily so that they can come to work and know that these are consistent, which means that they don't have to worry about those things. They can be worried about the things that they have to do at work. As a licensed facility, Dismas Home must comply with specific state standards designed to protect both the residents and the staff. And the policies are written to maintain compliance, yes. And employees can rely on consistent policies to address a wide range of topics that may impact their mental health. Access to clear answers, pathways for conflict resolutions, and opportunities for self-care that may help alleviate stressors that contribute to mental health challenges. Management employs several strategies to encourage employees to prioritize and manage their self-care. And these include things like a use it or lose it policy for paid time off. We encourage our staff to use their time off for, appointments and rest. If you need a mental health day, that's what your PTO is there for. No banking it until Christmas and then taking the whole last week of the year off. You get more time than that, and we encourage people to use it to manage their own needs. And self-care is definitely one of the highest things that we stress as a way for everyone to take advantage of. Listen, it's also leading by example, right? We use clinical supervision and peer collaboration to normalize discussions about stress triggers, burnout, and self-care. These happen on a weekly basis between our clinician and our staff. She takes the time every single week to talk with them on a one-on-one and in a group setting so that they can collaborate and understand and share what's happening. And so none of the topics are taboo, right? So what happens is that the tactics used to address them include motivational interviewing and cognitive behavioral therapy. And so when they're in a one-on-one in a supervision situation with their clinical director, they have an opportunity to understand and know things that might be bothering them that are actually influencing the work that they're doing in the client relationship. It has to be a really clear path. They can't be carrying the stressors of their lives, which could be as simple as, I got 50 things going on at home and I don't have time, or I need to separate myself from these things, or it's a really complicated work day and everything's going sideways and we need to figure out how to manage that. And so the personal stress needs to be released or relieved, and we need to be very cognizant of that as we're working with our clients. Ultimately, staff have a higher level by using these methods. The tactics help them monitor and maintain boundaries and adjust their professional approach, which is really allowing them to also monitor themselves in a way that gives them some relief personally. Ultimately, the staff have a higher level of emotional awareness and an ability to maintain good personal mental health. I'm not talking about things that they've been diagnosed with because maybe they have certain diagnoses, but this is the day-to-day ongoing stress that we really need to manage in-house for all of our staff because we're very busy and we have a very important job in helping our residents move their lives forward. We also delegate tasks amongst ourselves. We encourage staff to equitably split the workload of case management, documentation, recovery support groups so that no one person feels overwhelmed or burdened by, I'm the only case manager in the house. No, we share it amongst everyone so that it feels equitable amongst all the staff. We're clear in our expectations of work requirements. Meaning the staff they don't need to guess. Well, was I supposed to do that? Yes, yes, you were. And this is the expectation. They're encouraged to have a sense of ownership and influence within the program, which means we come to them when we're talking about group, when they're in a group supervision and they're discussing client cases, we're asking for their input on how are we caring for this person and what is the progress and how is it working out and what do we need to do to change and what they're talking about in a group situation so that they have buy-in and they're feeling content with the work that they're doing. And by having that buy-in, it helps increase their confidence as a support worker, and it boosts their overall mood and work productivity, which is all really great things that we need at Dismas Home. I also want to talk a little bit about leadership and leading by example. As the executive director, I share an office with 4 other people, and it's a very tight situation, and we all have stressors that happen over the course of the day. My day is just as busy as everyone else's, and have to take into consideration what's happening in my world. And leading by example is ultimately my goal is to show them that, yep, I'm just as stressed, but I can do these things that help me. And so maybe you can try some of those things. Leadership has a unique and influential role in shaping the culture around mental well-being, and by continuing to model healthy mental health practices, we can inspire the staff to do the same, right? The goal beyond just setting policies, this really goes beyond just setting policies, and it extends to all daily actions that reflect the organization's commitment to our staff's well-being. I can give you a perfect example. Yesterday, I got an email that blew my mind. I just did not know how to manage it, and I thought, okay, I'm going to get up, I'm going to go outside, I'm going to take a walk because I need to blow off some steam. And so I shut my laptop down, I went for a walk, and I came back 10 minutes later, and okay, I had cleared my head and my attitude was better and I could manage what was happening. And the rest of the staff in the office, who are also very, very busy doing the work that they're doing to support the organization, understood that I wasn't taking it out on them. I needed to blow off some steam and they weren't getting the heat from whatever was happening over in my little corner. It has an impact on them. And I have to realize that not just in my role as the executive director, but all of us in leadership have to understand that we need to consistently have a messaging in mental health care, self-care, managing our workspace health and mindset that it has a big impact on the rest of the staff. So when leadership consistently demonstrates the importance of good mental health through their own behavior, whether it's by taking mental health days or setting healthy boundaries or prioritizing self-care, it sends a powerful message that this is a priority at all levels of the organization. And it reassures staff that leadership not only talks about mental health, but practices what they preach. It reinforces that it's okay to take care of yourself without guilt or fear of judgment, right? And breaking the do as I say and not as I do barrier. And that's huge because in the nonprofit world, we're all going at warp 10, trying to cram in as much work as we possibly can. And, often the feeling of guilt that I didn't get enough done today, I'm not doing enough, I'm not supporting them enough. For some reason, it seems to be a challenge in the nonprofit world. I look at it this way. Often, staff may struggle to prioritize their own well-being because they feel like their managers or leaders aren't doing it themselves. And by openly acknowledging the need for personal mental health practices, leadership helps break that do as I say and not as I do mentality. We're actually saying, do what I'm doing because this is helpful to you too. It fosters an environment where making time for your mental health well-being is seen as both acceptable and necessary and not an afterthought or secondary to job duties. It's really been a huge shift in our organization because I'm like every most people in my leadership position, we work a lot of hours and we work really hard. And we're saying to our staff, no, you need to be done at 40 hours. Yeah, and I'm sitting over here doing other things. I need to also put that into practice and be clear about it and inspire open conversations about it. And so when I say, oh, we model vulnerability and speak openly about our own mental health challenges, stress, burnout, emotional fatigue, compassion fatigue, it encourages staff to be more open about their own struggles, specifically in the areas where they're caregiving, right, at work. It creates a dialogue in the workplace, but it also fosters this sense of support. And yeah, she really gets what I'm going through, or yeah, I can see that she's struggling. So if she can manage it, I can too. It fosters a a a a, a place of camaraderie. Maybe that's not the word, but um, we're all in it together and we're all doing it consistently and we're working. Leadership can set the tone by modeling self-reflection during team meetings or one-on-ones in a simple check-in on a mental health, like how you feeling today, or what have you been doing to take care of yourself this week? They ask me that all the time. What are you doing? And I have to sometimes take a minute and say, well, I did this or I did that. And then they're grateful because they're saying, okay, well, she is managing what's the stress that's happening in her world. It can also help reduce the stigma around the mental health discussions, right? Like Madeline was saying, that there is such a stigma. And then setting clear boundaries for work-life balance. And this is really hard in our world because we want to do all the things to help our clients all the time. And we have to fill our own buckets in order to continue giving, right? You can't give from an empty bucket. So you have to set the work-life boundary. You have to set your self-care boundaries, and you have to make sure that you're taking the time to do the right things for yourself to give you the energy to keep going forward. And leaders can occasionally share their own strategies for managing stress or dealing with burnout. It could be time management tools, mindful practices, or relaxation techniques. Personally, I sing in a choir. It is my life-saving soul food on the daily. And it just is, and I would never give it up. I will be old and dead when I give up singing. It's the most amazing thing. And so sharing some of this stuff in team meetings and in conversations with staff, they look at me like, you do what? And I go, uh-huh. And they go, oh, okay. The point is that I'm sharing something personal with them that gives them permission to then share maybe something personal with me that helps us make a connection and therefore feel more relaxed and more connected at work when we're doing the jobs that we have to do. We're also trying to create a model for resilience. By demonstrating resilience in action, whether it's by seeking support when it's needed, or sharing personal coping strategies, or showing how we can manage our stress, leaders can teach staff how to bounce back from difficult situations like my 10-minute walk yesterday. It shows that resilience doesn't mean being vulnerable, but rather knowing when to step back, recharge, and return with strength. Um, and by my last comments are about furthering the lead by example approach. Leadership can continue to foster a culture where mental health is not only respected, but actively promoted good mental health care. And leaders can show their commitment to self-care, that they're setting the stage for the entire team to follow suit, leading to a healthier, more resilient workforce and a healthy and happy workplace culture. And we really do need to do that at Dismas Home because we're setting example for our residents as well. If we can live in that space, so can they eventually. Thank you. I think I'm going to hand it off now to Jennifer.
Wonderful. Thank you. I'm going to take a little bit of a different twist on the topic of mental health. If I could have my slides pulled up, please, that would be helpful. Thank you. Marine Captain Nick Lasapio was born and raised in New Hampshire, and he was killed in California when his Osprey helicopter crashed during a military training mission. I had a couple conversations, well, many conversations with his mom. I never actually met Nick. I know of Nick because of the many stories that his mom shared during the leadership programs that she and I facilitated together. After Nick's accident, his mom, Sue, had gone through the military's TAPS program, the Tragedy Assistance Program. She had used her employee assistance program. She met with a couple of counselors. They didn't have the grief experience that she had hoped for, and she was really struggling. Now, if you take a look at the date, this is in June of 2022. We're just coming out of the pandemic. Our mental health system is tapped out. The therapists that Sue was reaching out to, they were either booking 6 months out or they didn't return her call. So she was really struggling to find the additional support that she needed to help try to manage this new world without her son. I didn't know anything about grief. Just like so many of us, I was grief avoidant and I was grief ignorant. I was illiterate when it came to understanding the impact that grief has on us. So I went on a mission to try to help my friend. I started to research all different kinds of support services and center podcasts and everything that I could get my hands on, figuring that she would do with it as she needed, if she wanted to. One of the things that came through my feed during my research was a grief certification program. Had no idea what it was, but I thought, well, maybe I can do this to help my friend. So I applied. During that program, I started to learn how grief impacts us physically, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually. And I started to look into, how does somebody go back to work when you're in this depth of grief? It impacts us in ways that I had no idea. And yet we're supposed to just go back to work and perform. So that's why I left my really good job and with a great paycheck and benefits. Oh, have to stop sharing for a while. Okay. So I left to start doing my own work and helping organizations and helping individuals understand how to process grief. So if we take a look at what grief is, right? We oftentimes think of grief as loss of human life, but grief is so much bigger than that. It's pet loss. It's divorce, job loss, empty nest, medical diagnosis, natural disasters, world events, and the list goes on and on and on. And it's so much bigger than we actually are aware. When you look at 2025, we had over 3 million people died in the United States, each leaving on average 5 grieving people behind. Now that's a small number. You also have to take into consideration the ripple effect of those grieving people. And those people are also going to work. We have about 2.5 million divorces that happen each year. That's also a level of grief. Thank you. Sorry about that. So we have about 2.5 million divorces that happen each year. We have about 1.5 million of people going through breakups. We have all of the people who are suffering from natural disasters. All of them carry that into work. As much as we want to try to be able to leave it at home, we do carry that into our workforce. We also have to look at 1 in 12 children will experience the death of a sibling or a parent by the age of 18. And that number increases to 1 in 9 by the age of 25. This is our future workforce. When we take a look at our current workforce, we have an aging workforce. Our older adults grieve at higher rates because they have more lived experience. They're dealing with many more losses because of the time that they've been on this earth. So we carry a lot of this grief into our workplace. And oftentimes what happens is that employers may see a performance issue when it could actually be related to grief. One of the people that I was working with, the supervisor had gone to human resources. We need to put this person on a performance improvement plan. And human resources did what I think is the right thing. They said, instead of going and putting them onto the performance improvement plan automatically, let's go have a conversation to find out what's going on. Noting observable behaviors, not just the behaviors, but also where the performance has decreased. And that's what they did. They went to the employee. We happened to notice that your performance measures have slipped. We've noticed different levels of behaviors that we haven't seen before, and they specified what those were. The employee at that time broke down and said, I really thought that I was doing a good job of holding it all together. And that's called masking. And she said, I just recently learned that one of my parents is diagnosed with a serious terminal illness. So they've been trying to figure out how to get them to doctor's appointments, how to manage people coming into the home to help take care of things. And she was actually contemplating having to quit her job to be a full-time care provider for her parents. So long story short in this is that the employer actually worked with the employee and was able to provide different accommodations, talked about the employee assistance program that they had, shared information on Family Leave Medical Act, and really supported the employee. So when you look at this as a recruitment and retention strategy, they did the right thing in helping this employee. What we oftentimes don't think of as employers when we start to see people struggling, right? Both Madeline and others had talked about this, that when we're grieving, the brain releases these stress chemicals, excuse me, the cortisols and adrenalines, excuse me. And what happens is that those stress chemicals kind of hijack the feel-good chemicals of, the dopamines and oxytocins. And it displays very similarly to what we see as mental health conditions. So I did some research on, Madeline talked a lot about these, right? Depression, anxiety. When we're struggling with a mental health condition, not necessarily a diagnosable mental illness, but just normal everyday mental health conditions, grief and mental health, these are some of the ways that they show up. These are observable behaviors for many of us, depression, anxiety, sleep disruptions, weight changes. And these have an impact in the workplace. So when you recognize these, it's being able to have these compassionate conversations with employees. We don't know, they may be grieving something, they may be going through a breakup. And how is it that you can support them? Again, it's not your job to be their counselor or their therapist, but it is our jobs as employers to be able to support our employees through the struggles that they're facing and to provide these supports. Because when we look at death of an employee and unsupported grief in the workplace, it costs American businesses billions of dollars annually. Ignored and mishandled grief leads to higher turnover, higher rates of absenteeism, weakened morale, costly on-the-job errors, and a term that I learned just about 2 years ago, presenteeism. Presenteeism is when I am here physically, right? You can see me, I'm working, but I'm not here emotionally, psychologically. I'm distant, and that can cause really significant errors, accidents, and injuries. So when an employee returns to work, it doesn't mean that they're returning to normal. So my question would be, is your organization grief sensitive? Is your organization grief sensitive? If you take a look at your bereavement leave policies, most organizations have a bereavement leave policy of 3 to 5 years, and that is for immediate family members only. Parents, siblings, children, sometimes grandparents. I would ask, what if I love my best friend more than I do my sibling? What if I'm closer to my aunt than I am my father? And is 3 to 5 days really enough time to process the loss and then come back to work immediately and function? I'm going to venture to guess that that's no. I think about Sue and how there's no way that Sue would have been able to go back to work as a full-time professor and teach in the way that she would have done before. So if you keep these things in mind, what is it that you can do to support your employees? How is it that you can start to look at different bereavement leave policies with some flexibility, and understand that, I've got my sweatshirt here that Sue gave me. You can kind of see it here. It's everyone you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about, right? If you keep that in mind, I ask that we start to take a look at people who are struggling. They may be struggling with some underlying grief that is impacting their mental health, which also could be impacting their work performance. So identifying that people are struggling and replacing judgment with kindness, compassion, empathy. It really is a recruitment and retention strategy, and it's the right thing to do. So Mike, over to you.
All right. Thanks so much, Jennifer. If anybody in the audience has a question, feel free to drop it in the Q&A bucket. I have a question for Madeline, but you guys can all chime in. And this is for fans of the HBO medical drama, The Pit. There is a scene where Dr. Samira Mohan, she thinks she's having a heart attack, but she's having a panic attack. She's got some conflict with her mom, and she's just freaking out. And when Dr. Robbie, the chief of the medical room, the emergency room, finds out it's just a panic attack, he doesn't handle it well. He chides her and basically says, hey, get your shit together, come to work, whatever. He later backs off and comes to check on her, softens his approach, but he's already done some damage. If you react poorly as a manager or as an employer dealing with an employee, how do you come back from that? How do you fix it? What are the legal ramifications? You've made a mistake.
Right. And so, yeah, legal ramifications are something to think about, right? To keep in mind, because you want to make sure that the relationship is restored and that nobody feels harassed or threatened on an ongoing basis. But yeah, how do you come back from that in an interpersonal, in a workforce wellness perspective, right? A panic attack, this is not something. So when I first heard the term panic attack, I would have had no idea that it was something that rose to a level of really feeling like a heart attack. And these are not, I might have a panic attack and go, oh, maybe this is a heart attack. I haven't felt this before. Doctors have panic attacks and think they're having heart attacks. This is something that is a very serious issue that and again, based on your show, even doctors don't always know about, right? And so to be able to come back and just say, I realized that I had a major knowledge gap, and I sought information to figure out how I responded and how that wasn't scientifically informed. And I just need to apologize for that, how that happened. That's not something, that's an interpersonal issue. I wouldn't worry about an employee going, well, this is an admission of the fact that you didn't acknowledge my, this serious medical condition. You're acknowledging something that plainly happened. So I think that to make those reparations as worthwhile and to be able to say, I didn't know then, now I know, how can we accommodate, but that's a very good example. I haven't seen that show, but it sounds like it was well handled. So
he makes that mistake more than once. Highly recommend it.
Sure.
Anyone else want to chime in on that? Cheryl or Jennifer?
I will share somewhat of a personal experience with that. My husband is 6'4", and I am not. He was, it sounds silly to say, but he was getting bullied by his general manager. And he started to have panic attacks, and they displayed as heart attacks. He dropped down to 170 pounds at 6'4" because of the stress on the job site, because of the mental health conditions that were kind of imposed upon him because of this stress. And it's pretty scary to think that having a panic attack land you in the hospital due to it displaying as a heart attack.
I can relate to that, having gone through something not quite as extreme as that, but the solution, a new job.
Exactly.
That
That's
was the
exactly what he
solution.
did. Yep. Yeah.
But that's the thing when we talk about people who go to work and they feel like, okay, I'm just not cut out for the workplace clearly because obviously my environment doesn't accommodate what's going on with me. You know, my workforce doesn't know how to take this into account. But there, when it comes down to it, small changes can accommodate what feel like insurmountable issues to employees before there's awareness between the employee and the employer what they can do to help. So having that conversation can change the direction of somebody's life in terms of them thinking, I guess I'm not cut out for this, or man, that was so much easier change than I thought. So
Thanks, Madeline and Jennifer. This is for you, Cheryl. As you noted, managers tend to be reluctant to reveal their vulnerability, when they're battling emotional distress, whether they're dealing with relationship trauma or the illness or death of a loved one. How do you navigate the boundaries on how much to share? I realize this is something that happens over time as you build relationships within in the workplace, but how do you protect somebody's privacy? How do you know when to, not say too much about yourself or to pry too much into somebody else's situation?
Well, I think part of it comes down to uh, workplace ethics and realizing that, we're not allowed to really pry into someone's personal life. And if they wish to share something, they're more than welcome to share it. And we just have to keep it confidential, and make recommendations. I'm not a therapist. I don't play one on TV. I'm not in that role. So my recommendation is to offer them a referral to either see someone else or finding them a place where they can share that in a confidential manner. That's
Mhm.
I'm not a therapist, I can't help them, right? But I certainly can be there and be sympathetic and empathetic. And if my situation offers a place where I can say, I can share something about myself with you to make them feel like they're not alone or they're not crazy because they've had this experience or this is a place where they're completely stressed. Going back to sympathy and empathy, but keeping ultimate confidentiality is not just HR, but certainly ethics.
Thank you, Cheryl.
You're welcome.
This is for you, Jennifer, and you've alluded to this, but maybe you can expand on it. A few jobs ago in another state, I worked for a manager who told a young woman, one of my colleagues, her father had just died a couple weeks before, and he basically said, you need to get over this. Not surprisingly, she left that job not too long after that, and she was a really good employee. It was a blow. Um, but how can employers make humane decisions with knowing how much time and realizing that there's no set time?
Right. There's no set time when it comes to grief. Some grief is short term, some lasts a lifetime. So it's what is it that you can do to provide the accommodations necessary? When we look at bereavement leave policies being 3 to 5 days, it's typically immediately after the death. And sometimes the reality is it doesn't, the bereavement leave may not be needed until future dates, right? So that's where it's having flexibility. Do you have a PTO policy where you can take these mental health days? I have worked with so many people with different types of death that are they having to go to court and meet with lawyers, and so it just becomes so much bigger. So I think it's having that compassion and having some level of flexibility. I will tell you that there is a need for policy. I think about, when I was in high school, my grandmother died at least once or twice a semester. Um, but that's not a bad policy, right? That's a bad hire. So it's being able to look at, because you may have employees like that. So it's being able to look at what is it that you can do to accommodate and take a look at the human factor side of things, because you don't get over it.
I once heard a college professor say the same thing. A lot of grandmas die during the end of the semester when projects are due. We've
Yeah.
just about reached the end. Madeline, do you have any closing comments? Any,
um,
or anything?
thank you so much for making space for this really important topic. I think that people who struggle with mental health, they're all around us. They're ourselves. We all walk around trying to make our struggles with mental health as invisible as possible. And the effect of that is that it feels like we're the only ones who struggle. So to be able to recognize, have those conversations that Cheryl talks about, just knowing that somebody else is there, that you're not alone and walking through that can make all the difference in the world to somebody who feels like they're just not going to be heard. Letting somebody know that they're going to be heard can make all the difference in the world in retention, productivity, and well-being for everyone. So.
I want to thank everybody for attending today, and I want to thank Sheehan Phinney for sponsoring this webinar. Check your email soon. You'll be getting a link to a recording so you can check on this later. Thank you so much for joining us today.